Chapter 39. Dark Humanity. "Skinwalker," Spectre snarled. "That's rich, coming from the filthy plague race itself." "What do you mean?" Ronin asked. He needed to stall for time. "What do I mean?" Spectre screamed, his voice now sounding more like a man's than a woman's. "The galaxy was filled with life and diversity before you came along. Countless species coexisted in harmony. We, the Safer, were highly respected ambassadors, famous for our ability to communicate. Everywhere our race traveled, we were welcomed." Ronin felt some of his strength return, but it still wasn't enough. "Wait," he said back in wry amusement. "You literally have to devour the species you wish to turn into. So if I am getting this right, you ate other sentient life, then turned around claiming you were ambassadors to the very same race you were eating? Those are the acts of a monster, not an ambassador. That is merely the cycle of life, but you, humans," Spectre spat, showing clear disgust at the mention of humanity. "You killed everything. You left nothing behind in your endless need for expansion. All that life, all of that potential. You just wiped it out, and now it's gone forever, never to see the light of day again. No, if there's one species in this galaxy that deserves damnation, it is not mine. Filth." To Ronin's horror, Spectre's wound began to heal, and within that wound, he saw golden flickers of light. That was the alien artifact's energy. He wasn't the only one who'd been stalling for time, it seemed. Spectre had taken a part of what made him, and with that came the strength he'd gained from the alien artifact as well. "I knew I was right about you," Spectre said as he began to move. "There truly was something special inside of you. Now, give it to me." The Skinwalker launched forward in a sprint, and Ronin rose up, narrowly moving out of the way as Spectre attempted to grab him. Slamming into the other end of the room, Spectre turned, then immediately rushed at him again. What followed was a series of wild bull rushes, where one party repeatedly attempted to grab the other, and the other party continually did its best to dodge. Not being able to make any prolonged contact with the Skinwalker, Ronin was forced into only using strikes, throwing in the odd kick or punch when he saw the chance. It wasn't of much use, though, seeing as whatever damage he did manage to inflict was swiftly healed soon after. Spectre also did more than just heal. With every charge, he was becoming faster. "It is inevitable," the alien chuckled after another failed charge. "Now that I've already had a taste, it's only a matter of time before I manage to catch you." Ronin spared a quick glance towards Scrabby. Fortunately, the child was still breathing, but this couldn't go on. Sooner or later, something was bound to happen. Either he'd get caught, or Scrabby would end up dead. Ronin flashed Spectre a malicious grin. "I called the authorities the moment I realized what you were. Time is the one thing you do not have, Skinwalker." Spectre next began to shake as he let out an inhuman shriek in rage. He then spread his arms wide and charged again, but it was different this time. There was a sense of urgency in this charge, a desperation. As he rushed forward this time, Spectre managed to graze one of Ronin's shoulders. The dynamics of the battle changed after that. Ronin gave up trying to hit back and only focused on defense, each wild charge only coming closer and closer. He did everything he could to avoid getting caught. But eventually, the inevitable happened. One of the alien's wild charges hit. Boom! Probably miscalculating his speed, Spectre hit Ronin so fast he was knocked back before Spectre could grab him. But the direction in which Ronin moved was not towards some random wall. Instead, what he flew towards was a peculiar-looking navy blue suit, standing open and ready for entry along the wall. The Hero Maker. Ronin had been hit on purpose. "No!" Spectre shouted, but it was too late. As the suit closed in around him, Ronin made some light movements, feeling out the suit. "Yes, this should do just nicely," he said slowly, the sounds of twirling gears and working servos accompanying his words. Boosters emerged along the Hero Maker's legs as he spoke through the face guard, his voice now tinged with metal. "My turn." The thumps of metal striking floor rang out as Ronin stormed the alien, locking him in an iron grip before they crashed into a wall. They next broke through said wall, then plunged into another apartment as concrete and rebar blew out around them. Ronin stabilized himself, then continued the charge, blowing through yet another wall as they exited the building entirely. With no new room to brace them, they began plunging down from the third floor. "You'll pay for this. You have an uncle, right?" "Nagata, was it?" Spectre screamed as they closed in on the street below. The duo slammed into the ground, and the impact from the fall separated them. Spectre, now with a crushed leg, caved-in chest and a partially split skull, rose up and ran. The alien's physique clearly operated on a different set of rules compared to humans. Those had been mortal wounds, to a man that is. But a skinwalker? With the aid of his armor, Ronin picked himself up, readying himself for the hunt. He felt beaten, battered, strained in ways he hadn't thought possible. But the ghost butcher was far too dangerous to let go. "He even threatened my family!" Ronin inwardly snarled. As Spectre picked up speed, the boosters along the Hero Maker's legs activated, and he chased after. The pursuit continued throughout the district, as Spectre did what a skinwalker did best, repeatedly attacking and draining anyone he came upon. By the time Ronin managed to catch up, Spectre was already halfway up a building, holding a man by the neck in one arm whilst climbing the wall with the other. Ronin activated the jetpack as every single booster along his suit began to fire. He jumped, flying up to meet the climbing alien. "What? It can fly?" Spectre shouted as Ronin crashed into him, knee first, knocking him off the side of the building. Mid-air, he grabbed both of Spectre's arms, then moved the alien under him as the two plunged towards the ground. With the aid of the jetpack and boosters along his legs, Ronin next angled their fall in a more horizontal direction. Boom! They crashed onto the streets, then slid across several tens of meters of concrete. But that was only part of it. Ronin, whilst wearing 160 kilograms worth of power armor, had ridden Spectre like a board as they slid, pressing him hard into the ground. There was now a long strip of blood behind them, and large sections of the alien's body had been shaved off. 100%! Despite missing half his face, Spectre still acted lively as he tried to talk. Ronin couldn't understand a word of it, but at this point, words had lost all meaning anyways. He stepped onto the skinwalker's back, grabbed a hold of two legs, then pulled. Spectre howled in pain. Blood and guts next began to flow out from the alien's body as bones were torn from sockets. Then, finally, the tendons began to snap. FLOMP. The skinwalker's legs and torso separated, but the alien wasn't dead yet. From the two separated body parts, Ronin could still see a multitude of microscopic tubes reach out as they tried to dig into his armor. Just how much vitality does this guy have? He cursed. He placed one part of Spectre's body upon another, embraced the bundle with both arms, then squeezed. Crunch! All movement stilled, and the tubes fell limp. Spectre, the infamous ghost butcher, after everything he'd done, was finally dead. Ronin felt some of his vigor return as the energy he'd lost to Spectre earlier traveled back. Exiting the dying flesh, it passed through the suit's armor as it returned to his body. Unbeknownst to him, however, something else followed along as well. Circling the edge of the alien artifact, there was now a tint of black intermixed, tainting the normally clear gold. Ronin stood silently above the dead Spectre, allowing himself a few moments of rest. Blood slowly dripped off his power armor, adding to the growing pool beneath him. He looked up at the sky. It seemed more red today somehow. As the minutes passed, the booming alarm characteristic to the planetary guard began to sound out, and Ronin knew he couldn't stay long. He needed to check on Scrabby. Before the guard could arrive, he moved back towards the apartment. He let the power armor do most of the walking this time. He was simply too exhausted to move himself. After he made his way up the stairs, then entered the torn-apart room, he tiredly sat down on the couch, the hero maker sinking deep into the cushions. Scrabby was still breathing, fortunately. But as for Elsa, Ronin shook his head. She was long gone by now. At least he'd brought Spectre outside, saving one of them. He continued to sit there, not moving, just staring into the air. Today had been a rough day. He'd made himself a promise back on Exodon, to protect two people. Now, one of the two he'd promised to protect were gone, because of him. He tilted his head back towards the ceiling, then sighed. Shit. Chapter 40. Aftermath. The wild chase after Spectre had caused full-blown panic to spread across the district. Ronin could see it all from within the apartment. The large openings he'd made in the walls had provided him with quite the view as he waited. He could see people amass, funneling themselves into stampeding crowds as they ran. Others he saw break into buildings. Thieves. No, even worse. Looters, he thought. He glanced over at Scrabby. The kid was still breathing, but who knew how long that would last? Soon, ships began to approach. Gray in color and triagonal in shape, the ships all had a blocky, brutalist appearance. And if the booming sirens weren't enough of a warning, the iconic logo spelling out P and G above the two crossed lasguns was. Everyone knew what that meant. The planetary guard had arrived. Ronin watched as the ships headed towards the crime scene, then began to land. There would be plenty to investigate. In a district like this, they had to, and he'd seen Spectre drain at least 24 people as he'd fled. Next, there was a different kind of siren. Ronin only heard it faintly at first, but it soon reached volumes rivaling that of the planetary guard. A tired smile formed on his lips. Finally. Ronin hadn't lied when he'd told Spectre he'd called the authorities. He had, however, left out the specifics of whom he'd called. After one of the long-awaited medical ships landed outside, 4 people dressed in white exited down the ramp, then began to walk up the stairs of the building. Ronin pointed at Scrabby the moment they reached the door. He's been attacked by a skinwalker. He's breathing, but I don't know anything beyond that. I haven't touched him since I saw him like this. The man at the front of the group nodded, then walked up to Scrabby as he pulled out a medical scanner. Skinwalkers are rare out here, and we lack the medical knowledge on how to deal with this. But we'll do our best, he said. You should prepare yourself, though. His chances aren't looking good. As the man finished the scan, a woman at the back brought out an injector, then pressed it into Scrabby's shoulder. What about the quantum net? Ronin asked. If I can get access to it, would that help with healing him? Perhaps, the man said, as a gravity stretcher was brought in. But remember, we neither have the equipment nor the drugs to treat something like this. Knowing how to heal someone is not the same as healing them. Scrabby was next moved onto the stretcher, then floated out as one of the white-dressed paramedics remained behind. "You look pretty injured yourself," the man said. "You should come along as well." "No," replied Ronin. "Just leave. Take care of Scrabby, I'll be fine." The paramedic made a nonchalant shrug. "All right, it's your money." He walked out of the room, then left for his ship. Ronin sat for a few minutes longer, nearly dousing off a few times due to exhaustion. He dizzily shook his head. He needed to get back home. Letting out a grunt in complaint, he had the hero maker help him up from the sofa, then began to move. Before he could reach the door, however, he was immediately accosted by what had to be over a dozen members of the planetary guard. "Hands up! Get out of the suit!" Wearing black and yellow uniforms, the gung-ho officers burst into the room with weapons at the ready. "Whoa! I'm the victim here," Ronin shouted, raising his metal-encased arms. "We'll see about that at the station," a female officer said. "Now exit the suit." In short order, Ronin was flown towards the nearest guard station, then forced inside the building. He was barely able to walk at this point, but the planetary guard wasn't going to help, and the hero maker's suit had been left behind in the apartment. It was Spectre, a skinwalker. "If anything, I did this city a favor by stopping that guy," Ronin said as he was shuffled down the corridor. "You're pretty knowledgeable about aliens. What other aliens have you had dealings with before? Do you know them well?" the female officer asked. He'd tried to explain himself several times now on the way here, but nobody seemed to listen. They just wanted to accuse him of things he hadn't done. Eventually, they came to a stop, and Ronin was made to wait as they opened a heavy iron door. Beyond it was a white, small room. Besides the concrete walls and ceiling, the only things visible in this cubic cell were 2 chairs and a table. He'd been in one of these before. Ronin was next shoved inside, then made to sit on one of the chairs. "Look, just search up my name. Ronin Maximus. I'm done talking if you're going to continue on like this." "So now you've decided to go quiet," the woman chuckled. "Guilty conscience." As they were about to chain him to the table, Ronin, in spite of his fatigue, quickly crossed his hands behind his head, then leaned back. He gave the men around him a calm look, then spoke in a flat voice. "If you think you can chain me to the table this time, think again. I've been cooperative so far, but there are limits." One of the officers grabbed Ronin's arms and tried to move them, but they remained locked in place. He next leaned back as he pulled with all his might, but when even that didn't work, he called for help. "Come," the officer grunted. "Help me with this." More men joined in and began to pull. "I've been to Exodon before. They let me out again soon after. I will leave it to you as to figure out why." Ronin, now with 4 men on him, fixed the female officer with a steady gaze. He'd said enough. Not moving his eyes away from her, the struggle with the men continued until eventually one of the men had had enough and reached for a gun. "Stop," the female officer said. "For now, he's where we want him. Investigate his background first." Some of the men left the room, and after about 20 minutes of silence later, the tone in the room made an abrupt shift. "So, Mr. Maximus, I will have to apologize for our treatment of you earlier. We didn't know," the female officer said, her voice now soft and polite. "That being said, though, even if you are innocent, many are still dead, and you seem to have been right in the middle of it. Would you please go over in detail what happened today? Seemed they'd finally figured out they couldn't frame him. Ronin lowered his arms, then nodded. I'd be happy to. He next went over what had happened from the moment he arrived at the apartment until he crushed Spectre's body between his arms. Often, he had to stop mid-sentence to elaborate further, and there were plenty of questions to answer. In particular, they wanted to know what had landed him in the crosshairs of a skinwalker, but he couldn't answer that. Not truthfully, at least. Hours passed as he kept talking, and he often had to repeat himself. He did make sure to avoid mentioning anything related to District 101, though. If they found out he'd launched a private war against the alien, even his genius status might not save him. Then, when it was finally over, he was escorted out of the station and they'd called down a ship for him? Status really makes a difference, huh? Ronin thought. He stepped into the shuttle, then collapsed onto a seat as he let out a tired breath. He really needed to get some sleep. Some distance away from District 13, at the very top of Ironglades, a report arrived. Soon after, that very same report, written and signed by the Planetary Guard, was transferred over to the leaders of the Space Force Academy. 12 hours later, 2 figures arrived in an elevator in front of the mayor's office. Both Principal Armstrong and Petrov Bjerkson showed a tense expression as they walked out of said elevator. The door before them now was the only thing currently separating them from Mayor Brunstein, and for what they were about to discuss, they might lose their jobs. The situation, in fact, had gotten so bad even the Prime Minister might get involved at this point. A finely dressed woman walked up to them, then bowed her head. "He's ready for you now," she said, her voice quiet. The two nodded, then waited for the woman to open the door. As they entered the room, they could see the mayor busily tapping the air, likely finishing up some work with the implant. Armstrong cleared his throat. Herm, Mayor?" Quickly finishing up, Brunstein's eyes regained focus. "So," he began, "what do you have to say for yourselves?" Petrov made an awkward cough. "Mayor, concerning genius candidate Ronin, our personality estimates all predicted he should have taken the contract." "Personality estimates?" "Look at the damn report again. If we read between the lines, this kid not only waged a private war against a crime lord, he fought a void damn skinwalker. It's a miracle he is even alive." Brunstein interrupted. "Yes, but if you'll allow me," Petrov said. He made a swipe with his hand, and a hologram appeared upon the mayor's table. Above the black table's surface, projections of light began to show detailed information regarding every single decision Ronin had made over the years. Accompanying every action were psychological evaluations, temperament estimates, and probability calculations. The list went on, detailing anything from which type of food he'd eat to how he'd react when insulted. And the further down it went, the more accurate the predictions became. Only after the recent terrorist attack near the academy did the list get spotty, disappearing completely a few days later. "We have here a record of every single decision Ronin Maximus has made over the last 10 years, Petrov said. "Based on this and our various predictive algorithms, we estimated a 93% likelihood that he would have taken the contract." "And yet you still failed," the mayor growled. "Something changed after he switched out his implant for the Uninet," Principal Armstrong hastily added. "Not only is the Uninet impossible to monitor, Ronin also became a completely different person after that day. All of our predictive models are now useless." You never should have offered him that contract to begin with, regardless of your probability estimates, Brunstein said. How is he supposed to stay loyal to Tar now? He's not only been thrown in prison, but you even refused to help when his life was on the line. There's a good reason behind our actions, Armstrong said in defense. Ronin has shown a clear distrust towards authority, and a month in prison changes a man. Besides, if he's not going to be loyal, there are other means. This is on you, Brunstein said, then frowned. But I guess you're right. There will always be a risk that he'll defect now. By other means, I assume you mean a tribunal? Principal Armstrong gave the mayor a slow nod. He needs to be reined in, sir. Brunstein sighed. Well, all right. I'll call the Prime Minister and start the process. Unlike with your failure, though, I'll make sure this is done properly this time.